There you go. Welcome once again, and I'm looking forward to this very interesting event. There you go.
Thank you, Siegfried, and the team of the GIZ for welcoming and hosting this event. So it's a particular event for us because GIZ is one of our main partner in the implementation. So thank you again for organizing this event. Expertise France is still quite a young actors in the field, as we were created in 2015. A young actor, but with a long history, as Expertise France is the merger of 6 public operators. And it has become the French leading agency in the field of technical assistance and cooperation. So we are an agency that implements projects on the field, working in partnership and building coalitions with several actors, of course, public institutions, but also private agencies, professional corporations, civil society organizations. And our aim is to address the demand and the need in advice and assistance in the field of public reforms and public policies. So we are acting in the field of democratic economic and financing governance, but also in the field of human development, human and social development, in the field of security stabilization, and we also have programs in the field of sustainable development. So today it's a pleasure to have our colleague from the field who can present you the project that we developed in Libya, and this project which shows it with the GIZ, as it is a good example of our activities in the field of the private sector. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Anne-Elisabeth, and thank you, Mr. Leffler. I'm Karina Lange. I'm working here at the representation, and I'm your facilitator for today. I'm happy my voice came back because I somehow lost it after the German election 2 days ago, but now it's okay. And as we said earlier, today we are going to look at the how of private investments, because we are talking a lot about private investments at the EU and at the international level right now, but we are not so much talking about the how. So we are going to fill that gap today. And Anne-Elisabeth already introduced our first speaker, which is Alexandre Chatillon-Mounier from Expertise France, and he has already more than 10 years of working experience in different developing countries, and he's going to present the project Support to Libya for Economic Integration, Diversification and Sustainable Development, shortly slide. So Alexandre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for my name as well, not easy to pronounce for German people, so thank you very much. We'll try to make this presentation as funny and entertaining as possible. I guess that will be switched on. So it's very impressive for me to be here in Brussels and see all of you being here at midday. Yesterday I was with a delegation of Libyan minister in Paris. I gave them an appointment at 7 sharp and they arrive at 8:30. So not the very same conception of timing. And we had a cruise on the Seine, so I had to ask the captain to wait for us for 30 minutes. Not very convenient. So today I will share with you my experience working in Libya, and we've been implementing this large EU-funded program for now 2 years, and quite an interesting program, you will see. So a few words. Slides is in a large EU-funded program, 7.8 million, which aim at promoting entrepreneurship and supporting the development of SMEs. We try also to provide support to small businesses with various tools I will go through. So here you say, what? Libya? You want to do something in Libya? This country where you have a couple of rival governments fighting to get the control of one country, a country where you have more than 5,000 militias. Nah, you gotta kidding me. It's not Libya you're talking about. I think that private sector development is the least of the concern of the Libyan. That is what all the people are thinking when we get to talk about Libya right now. But that's not true. And that was me when I defend that in front of my CEO 3 years ago. And you see, 3 years after, I'm getting younger and younger. So, one question. Why should we put all our efforts in private sector development in Libya? Or at least a bit, not all. A, because it's a good way to be invited to Brussels. Thank you very much. B, because Expertise France loves challenging, which is true. C, because developing small and medium businesses is a powerful tool to offer economic opportunities for least advantaged people, especially in war-conflicted countries. And D, because it provides Libyan youth with the tool to rebuild or build their institution and enable a new way of thinking. It's actually a bit of all, most of C and D, of course, but it's also the pleasure for me to be here. And of course, at Expertise France, we don't like the simple things, so we decided that our first large-scale program on private sector development will be in Libya, because if we can make it there, we can make it everywhere. So a quick overview of Libya for those who are not very acquainted with the country. So you recall Arab Spring, overthrow of Gaddafi after 42 years of kind of very strong and subsidized economy. Very different from what we can expect on the OECD countries. From 2011 to 2014, huge boom of the economy, liberalization, and everybody wanted to start their own business. So huge boom. Then in 2014, worsening of the security situation, attack on the airport of Tripoli, and all the international communities leaving the Libyan people rather alone. So, as you will see, Libya is depending on their oil revenue massively. We'll get back to this. And the worsening of the security situation led to a shortage in the oil production, so less revenue for the state. And everybody, almost literally everybody, worked for the public sector, then no more job for people. So you end up with a large cohort of people, young people, trying to find a job. And as I've mentioned here, Libya is one of the highest unemployment rate for people under the age of 30 in the world. 2017, or in the course of 2016-2017, some tentative of stabilization, and the security situation has improved. We can somehow go there with a pile of money to ensure our security, but still we can go there. And we announce election for next year, perhaps the year after. Some key economic figures so that you understand why we're doing that. 90% of the GDP is generated by oil exports. 7 people in the age of working over 10 have a part-time or full-time job in the public sector, which is quite unusual. 9 Libyans over 10 are getting a monthly subsidy or subsidized from the state. That's rather unusual as well. And in Libya, you do not pay electricity, you don't pay water, health expenses are free, you go to the hospital, it's free, you don't pay taxes, and custom and levies are among the lowest in the world. So you say, now I want to go there, because I will not pay taxes, although you guys are not all paying taxes, thanks to the EU, but I would definitely go there. 3 main characteristics on the Libyan economy, which are very unusual for a country at the same time, in the same place. 42 years I've mentioned that of over-centralized communism mesh economy, the private sector accounts only for 6 to 8% of the GDP. It's not a typo, it's a real figure. So the rest of the GDP is only generated by the public sector, which is absolutely unbelievable. It should be the other way around. And overall dependency, 90% of the state revenue comes from oil, and 70% of the GDP, the overall GDP, is coming from oil. And third aspect is that it's a conflict-affected country. The international community is not yet back in the country full time. So we are operating on a remote basis, which is not easy to, it's not helping. So what do we do in this context? First and foremost, we rely on the fantastic resilience of the Libyan people and on the youth to deliver three kinds of activities, because we have to be pragmatic. The large program that we have imagined at first, strengthening the institution, going from top to down, it's not working. We have to be very pragmatic. So one, we work to disseminate the entrepreneurship culture in Libya. As you have seen, nobody works in the private sector. It's very limited, so we have to offer economic opportunity. One way is to be and create your own company and be an entrepreneur. Second thing, improving the business services delivery. We'll get back to it, and unlocking access to finance for SMEs. I'd like to give you an example. If you are a father or mother of a young woman in Libya, and you have a successful businessman coming to you, asking your daughter to get married. At the same time, there's another guy working in the government, middle level, not real high aspirations. Your girl will get married with the civil servant and not with a successful entrepreneur, because it's the image of being an entrepreneur or working in the private sector. It's something that it's a terrible image. We have to recreate everything, because Gaddafi, over his reign, has destroyed completely the private sector. It was something that was not in his conception of living. So, very quickly, what we do to disseminate the entrepreneurship culture. We try to run events and campaigns to raise the awareness of young people about a different way than looking for a job in the public sector. In Libya, most of the young people are going to the universities for a simple reason, that you get scholarship, huge scholarship. I'm giving you another example. The CEO of the National SME program, he went to Dundee, in Scotland, to take his PhD. He has 5 kids with his wife. He got €7,500 a month to do his PhD over there, which is quite comfortable and higher than what you get in Libya. So most of the young students in Libya, the University of Tripoli, over a population of 6 million overall in Libya, accounts 125,000 students, which makes one of the highest ratio students per capita, per inhabitant in a country. That's quite impressive. So we try to channel various materials to drag those young entrepreneurs those young students who are interested in going in the public sector, because they have always known that, to a different path. And the path is entrepreneurship or working for the private sector. So we run business plan competitions. We are running boot camps, intensive 7 days training in Tunisia, to explain them what is it to become an entrepreneur. We're producing mentoring videos showcasing the stories of successful Libyan entrepreneurs. We're doing animation videos. We have a huge participation and a huge involvement on Facebook. We have more than 17,000 followers, Libyan followers, interested in receiving training materials from our Facebook page, monthly newsletter, and live sessions. That's the work we do to raise the awareness on entrepreneurship. Second work is improving the business service delivery. In Libya, there's only one organization providing support to SMEs. So let's say that you want to start your company, but you don't really know how to do it. You don't know how much capital you need at first. You don't know what are the processes to go through to register your company. There's only one organization. We're trying to help this organization to provide better services. And for the last 3 years, they delivered no services at all. We're trying to restart the machine. We are trying to implement incubation programs within university, and I put that it was a fail because we are experiencing dramatic and terrific problems with the universities, which are complicated institutions. I will get back to this quickly. We're trying to upgrade the services delivered by the Chambers of Commerce by training them. For now, the Chambers of Commerce of Tripoli accounts 40,000 members, which is quite a huge number. But they are only a stamp office. So you go there, you give your paper, you get your stamp, then you go back. There's absolutely no matchmaking events, no services that are delivered, training and study tour fairs. The job of the Chamber of Commerce is not done in any Chambers of Commerce in Libya. So we're trying to help them doing this kind of thing. We have set up an online business school together with an international organization called the International Trade Center to touch people in different locations. Last year, we run a pilot in Libya, a course on entrepreneurship, and it was taken by 1,000 people, and 300 people were graduated. So we decided to scale up, and that we now will offer a full business school, online business school, and actually it works. 3, we try to work on access to finance. You all know that accessing finance everywhere, including in the OECD countries, is the most complicated thing for an SME or for an entrepreneur. And in Libya, they perform the worst in the all report, including the doing business. So we are trying to set up 3 different mechanisms. One is reactivating the credit guarantee scheme. And the Libyan delegation is now in Paris to work on that with the French credit mediation, the credit guarantee scheme. We are putting a credit mediator to reduce and fill the gap between the SMEs and the banking system, because they do not talk to each other. When you are an SME, you apply for a loan, and the bank will never reply to you. We're trying to fill the gap, and we are setting a microfinance and a microcredit institution. Just going quickly because time is running. How do we operate? Trying to have a fantastic team of young, also young, talented Libyan international experts. We are 8. We are operating from Tunisia. We are trying to go as much as possible in Libya because we are operating from abroad. So it creates really lack of communication with our counterparts. We have a very supportive and understandable donor who happens in the room over there. And we are trying to stay away from politics as much as possible, even though it's not really easy. Try to get a sense of humor. Non-conventional approach. We're trying the online approach. We're trying to do innovative things because we are clear that working in Libya is very challenging for many reasons. Political context, the security context. And also, I will use this slide. Our Libyan counterparts are not exposed and have never been exposed to any international working practices. I know that I have to stop. So it's really problematic because we need to actually teach them how to work at the international level. We also talk to very weak public institutions with lack of motivation and decision making. The decision making process is so long; it's impossible. We also have competition between public institutions. We can't pay in Libya. Can you imagine? We implement a program in Libya, but we cannot send money in Libya, for instance. That's one of the most problem because the banking system is failing. It's impossible. Our bank in France, they refuse to send money, so we have to engineer a way of paying people. So it's impossible. That's the last slide. I'm sorry, I'm very demanding. First outcomes for you because I presented how challenging it was, but we are doing things. We have organized 1 business plan contest. We had over 1,000 applicants, 100 entrepreneurs we trained, 10 finalists, and 3 prizes money. We have a large community on Facebook. We are channeling mentoring videos, and we have trained 20 people from various the National SME Agency, the Chambers of Commerce, to better accompany the entrepreneurs. We are launching the online business school very soon. We have reactivated National Guarantee Fund, and we had an agreement with the banks so that they could invest thanks to this reactivation of the guarantee fund, more than 120 million Libyan dinars next year for the SMEs. That will be announced next week with the Prime Minister in Libya. We are setting up a credit mediation scheme, and we are in the process of setting up a microcredit institution. So now you're in love with what we're doing because we're doing a lot. So if you want to find out more, you're going to go on our website, our Facebook. You can ask me more. Libya is a very challenging place, but it's also very interesting because it pushes us to find out non-conventional way of intervening and supporting people. And the best reward is those entrepreneurs who are very, very demanding and very happy to get support. So investing in private sector development in Libya might not be the first thing that you could think of when you go there, but that's, for me, the most rewarding thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I think we all fell in love with that project. And do you have any direct questions on the project itself? We're going to discuss it more in depth afterwards, but do you have any direct questions, technical questions on the project? Okay, yeah?
Thank you very much. I'd like to understand the gender dimension of this project.
Very interesting question. When it comes to entrepreneur, it's very important. So we have a huge gender bias. We are trying to push women to be part of our program. For instance, for the business plan contest, we push to have at least 3 women in the final. We are running the boot camps. We have exactly 30 people in the room each boot camp session. 15 women, 15 men. So we are pushing to get more women involved in the process. However, Libya is a very, very conservative country, very close, and I don't know if we have Libyan people or Libyan national in the room, but very close to Saudi Arabia, and notwithstanding what they say. So it's not always easy, especially because Libyan women, they can't travel alone most of the time. So we have to have a chaperone all the time. So brother, father, but we do it, and thanks to the rules of the EU, we can pay for the chaperone. Which is not the case for the UN programs where they do not pay for them. So we are pushing for having women to be on board, and we were talking about I've talked about the mentoring videos. We plan to have 10 mentoring videos of young Libyans who have made it in Libya, running their company, and out of those 10 we have 5 women already. So it's online. We have for now released 3 videos. One is a woman running an art gallery, very interesting in Libya, and getting money out of it. So go online and check. So we are doing the best to include women in our program. It's not always easy because social pressure also, but when it comes to entrepreneur, we are successful because we are targeting the top motivated people. So we are on the safe side. We are ticking the box.
Thank you, Alexandra. I think that was a good start for a reply to your question, and we can also discuss it further in the panel discussion. And now we're going to have a second project that we're going to look at in depth, and it's going to take us to Uganda. And the question that is guiding our way to Uganda is how can actually large-scale investments create decent jobs for young people? And I'm happy to introduce my 2 colleagues, Nathan and Sonia.
Yes, thank you. My name is Sonia Palm, and I've been with GIZ for about 12 years now, more or less most of my time in Africa. And today what I'd like to talk with you about is from large-scale investments to jobs. We are all aware that most of the big investments which are coming in are very often associated with a non-growth. So there's no local employment, no local value added. So over the past few years, we developed an approach which we're implementing to see how we can change that. And I'm very glad that my colleague Nathan, who used to be a team member of my team in Uganda up until 1 month ago, so he can talk very concretely about what we did in Uganda there as well. Yes, just as a little bit of an introduction. So I4D stands for Employment for Development in Africa. A lot of letters for a small title, so that's on purpose. And it's commissioned by the BMZ, by the German Ministry for Development and Cooperation, but co-financed by quite a variety of donors from Norway, UK, also from the EU Trust Fund, and I'm actually also here in Brussels to sign another contract with the EU just tomorrow, actually, where AFD is part as well. So very glad that we're here together as well. And from Korea, and then also from a few private companies as well. There's 7 partner countries we're working in. You can see them. It's West Africa, Cameroon, Ghana, and then Eastern and Southern Africa. It's quite a large budget. It's actually around 70 million euros now, and it's running until the end of 2019. We're targeting specific sectors where we see that large investments are coming in, but they're not creating local employment. This is mainly around natural resource-related investments, which is very obvious in Africa. It's energy, minerals, gold, actually, but all the surrounding sectors underneath. So what you need to have in infrastructure, transport, or services to actually get the minerals out of the ground and get them somewhere else, or value add. And of course, agriculture and the emerging green economy as well, although it's quite a niche, I must say. What do we want to achieve? We have taken quite a bold step, I find still, that we said that we're going to get nearly 40,000 people into jobs. We got a gender quota there, which is quite high. We are saying that around 100,000 people will get a higher income, a decent income with our interventions. And we're also focusing on working conditions, health, safety, sanitation, and so forth. Everything we do is in cooperation with the private sector. We actually developed a kind of a model, which we developed after understanding how we want to work with them, where on the top level is actually international, multinational companies or IOCs, international oil companies or gas or whatever it is. And underneath you get EPC contractors. It's large management companies, engineering, procurement, construction companies who are going to actually hire the bulk of the people. And then underneath you get local companies who are bidding for contracts to implement work. And that's really the companies we want to work with on an operational level. And we do it through skills training. We understand from the companies what kind of job profiles they need. We work with them in the local TVET centers to improve the curricula. And we're also working on matchmaking and SME development as well. Yes, we have different kind of tiers, need different kind of cooperation models. This also took us some time to actually work that out, but we have got contracts with companies which we are working with. We call them development partnerships, and it's really a contract which the company needs to sign, and us as well, where we are agreeing on very specific and quantitative targets and budgets for a specific project on the ground. But we also understood that sometimes you can't leverage that so well. So we also see that we got softer agreements, memorandums of understanding, letters of intent. We have grant agreements if the companies give us money as well. But we also see that it's important to have strategic partnerships to really work all the time with the private sector to understand their needs and to target what we're doing through industry roundtables, steering structures on the ground, public-private working groups, and so forth. So within the 2 years, we are working now in this kind of setup. We have signed 50 partnerships. We are working together with around 70 partner companies directly on the ground and have leveraged about 80 million euros from the private sector in direct partnerships as well. Yes, you can see a selection of the companies we're working with. As I said, all the different levels are there. It's either multinational, international companies, or it's local companies, or it's also local companies. Some of you might know what that means. Right, from here on, I gave you kind of a setup, what we're working with, and I'd like to give Nathan now the floor to talk about a very concrete project partnership we are doing in Uganda. Nathan.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Nathan Lenzin. I came this morning from Eschborn, which some of you might have visited, others not. It's not It's not a great city, but it's where GIZ is headquartered. And I'm going to dive into the Ugandan case. It's because I have lived and worked the last 2.5 years in Uganda for GIZ, for E4D Soga. And I hope my experience from that time can serve the purpose of giving you an insight into how we worked with the private sector and how we can leverage private investments. So this is a map of East Africa, as you can see. And if you look at it a bit more closely, you see this red line coming from Mombasa. I don't know if you can read it, but the Mombasa port up to Kigali through Nairobi and Kampala. So this is one of the most important transport routes called the Northern Corridor in East Africa, and it's a very important route because everything that is imported into Uganda, into Rwanda, but also into Kenya comes through that route if it is not flown in by plane. They're working on that route. They're also constructing a railway, but at the moment it's mostly road. And I'm going to explain why that is important in a second. Now we have an oil pipeline coming in. That is one of the huge investments going to be invested into Uganda and Tanzania mostly in the next couple of years. That's a couple of $billion coming into the country. So we have other projects here. We have the railway project. It's also a couple of $billion going into Kenya and Uganda, mostly from Chinese investors in the next couple of years. And of course, we have oil and gas in all of these countries here on the map, I think with the exception of Burundi. And all these projects, they're going to create a massive economic growth on paper, right? What we're trying to do is to make this economic growth also benefiting the local people. For us, it's about local content. So we're trying to find ways to use that investment coming in from abroad, from multinationals, from international organizations, from government, to use that and create employment on the ground. And why I showed you this map, including the road, is because one way to target employment here is to target it through the transport sector. A couple of tens of thousands of trucks daily are traveling through that route. And it's going to increase with all these projects. Actually, probably the infrastructure will come to its maximum limits here. That's why they're all investing so much money also into the railway. But during the time when there's only road, of course, the road is one of the bottlenecks, but also an opportunity for the people. And at the moment in Uganda, most of the drivers are actually coming from other countries than Uganda. Many come from Somalia or some from Kenya, Ethiopia. And we've identified this sector as one of the opportunity sectors for Uganda in the area of job creation. So this is the case study. We work together here with a couple of partners, which I'm going to introduce in a second, to offer professional driver training. It's quite a straightforward project in the sense that it's easy to understand. It's actually about the physical activity of driving. It's about the technical skills of driving, which is actually very complex. I've sat in here in this truck and I tried to make sense of all the things around me, and it was actually impossible. There's something like 18 gears in the truck, and it's impossible to even start it. Actually, this is during the launch of our driver training project in Uganda, and even the trainers, because the truck had just arrived from Tanzania, had problems starting the truck. That's how difficult it was. Why do we do that in Uganda? I had mentioned it before. There's very few qualified truck drivers at the moment in Uganda, and actually in the area, and even less they are certified. So the standards are not there, and international companies such as Total or Bolloré, a big logistics partner in their area, they're of course looking for qualified, certified personnel so that they can trust them with their very heavy loads and very expensive loads as well. I mean, for the infrastructure, they're going to import a lot of materials, a lot of single pieces that are costing a couple of millions of dollars in one truck. So of course you need one qualified driver for that. Our goal is to train about 800 of them in a first step, and 600 of them should be in jobs. And how do we work together with the partners? That is, as you can see, through a lot of very intense one-to-one meetings with all of them. Of course, also in the group, we do that especially through this Safe Right Way NGO, which has already been present in the country for a couple of years. They're mostly doing training and capacity building in the area of road safety, but of course, road safety can only be achieved through training of drivers. So this is where our two interests merge. And for all these partners, road safety and, of course, the question of how to recruit future drivers when the business is going to explode is a huge challenge. What is very interesting about this project is that there was a market failure. So it was clear to everyone, to all these partners, including ministry, that there are no qualified drivers to do that job. Still, there was no supply emerging in the market that would have catered for that demand. So without GIZ, this project would not have happened. And what we're trying to do now is to make it as sustainable as possible, of course, so that after we leave the schools, and especially the school that we're going to support in the beginning, is going to sustain its business. The timing, of course, is very interesting with all these large-scale infrastructure investments that we've seen on the map. We have the sustainability aspects. It's actually a business case that is behind the school we're supporting, so that should ensure sustainability in the future. So that after 2 years of existence, that school should actually finance itself by enrollment fees. And transferability, of course, driving is a transferable skill. You don't need to work, if you've worked before with Total, tomorrow you can work with another company and even go into the informal sector. Driving is a very, very, let's say, demanded skill and will also pay highly. Actually, one of the MDs of one of those partners has told us that if they can't find the people in the local market, the salaries, of course, rise. So there will be very attractive jobs for the local people. So what we've achieved so far, I'm going to pick the in-kind contributions from industry because that is actually what makes it for us so worthwhile. It's not a donor-driven project. We came together because actually the IOCs, the international oil companies, came to us and asked us because they knew Ifodisoga had a couple of funds and they knew we were in skilling, so they asked us if we could not do something in the driver training area. So then we got acquainted with the idea and decided to go into it. So it's actually the opposite of donor-driven here, and that's, I think, what makes it interesting. And the contribution from industry, they're financing the trucks, they're financing the land, they're financing the office that we're using. So there's a lot of investment going in from their side because it's so close to their core business interest. And I think this is something we can take up as a lesson for a lot of partnerships with the private sector. If it's close to the private sector core business, and transport is very close to all of these partners' core business, then we have a way to leverage these funds to get the incentives, to get the interest from the private sector sparked, and this is where they're going to invest. This is where it's also going to be sustainable beyond the project period. So far we've trained 12 trainers from several partner schools. So we're not only supporting that one facility that we want to put up to a very, let's say, model example level, but we also support the existing, somehow mediocre training schools in the market to not distort the market. And then, yeah, we have, of course, the Ministry of Transport, which is fully committed, which we'll see also wants to have a stake in the school. So the future of that school is still somehow unsure. We want to bring it into a state of a social enterprise so that the school actually stays on the private level and gets the full support also from these partners in the private sector. But of course, the government also has its stakes. And in the future, of course, the 600 and 800 drivers respectively will get trained. And there will be also the opportunity for refresher trainings for private sector to send their already existing drivers for a refresher course. I'm going to give the word to Sonia again for the summary.
Yeah, thank you. And we thought, yeah, it is a very interesting and good insight to really understand what is happening actually with large-scale investments coming into a country and the different opportunities which are arising out of that. I mean, you might think, well, you're training 800, 600 in employment, but your goal is 40,000. You're quite a far way off. But I think this is also one of our key takeaways. It's which is of course opportunities and challenges which are arriving. We have such a program or project which is a very win-win situation with a small market, but where we know we are so close to the business and to the private partners, these people will get employment and they will stay in employment. We have got other ones where we're training 10,000s of people in the hope that there is a natural resource investment coming, and we got letters of intent with the large companies, with the EPC contractors, saying that they will be employing them, but the investment is still ahead in the future. So, you know, this is it is a very interesting kind of different projects we're doing in different countries on testing those out. But anyway, so our key takeaways really are that you know, large-scale investments disrupt the labor markets, as Nathan was pointing out. There are market failures, and these are opportunities where we can come together. And working close to core business, you know, creates these opportunities even more. But Total has a core business that, you know, there's transport there, but it's not their core business. They are not there to train people. They've got a completely different business. So it's very close to their core business, but there is a market failure to actually get it on the ground. And yeah, Nathan also very nicely talked about the sustainability of the issues then on the ground, and that ownership by private sector and government is really key to drive everything forward as well. But we also find, I mean, we got 70 partnerships now on the ground. We're still running a few more years. Every partnership is work in progress. It takes really a lot of engagement up until we're all speaking the same language. And it really, it takes a long time, you know, working on this MOU with Total. It has nearly taken us a year and a half. We got another overarching MOU with Total, with Shell, with Tullow, with whoever, but these really take time and a lot of negotiation on both sides to understand what the other one wants. So, and I think one of the other one is, you know, we are always as public institutions working with disruptions on the public side, elections or change of personnel, whatever it might be. But here we're also dealing with delays in investments. We can't control it. We don't understand it most of the time because the investments are being done by the shareholders or the investment decision. So sometimes, you know, this has really negative implications then on the timeline. We somehow have to deal with, which we did in a way with the transferability of skills. You train people up to a specific standard, and then they can work in any kind of economy which is emerging. Yeah, and working with government and private sector is really great. We learn a lot, and I think it's really a dynamic field to work with. But, you know, there's sometimes also, if it's working well, a question of ownership. So who owns afterwards the very successful school? Is it the government or is it the private sector? Which, of course, in a way is, you know, it's a nice kind of challenge to have as well. So, thanks.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Nathan. Do you have any direct questions on this project? Okay, I see many of them. Please, only questions that are directly on the presentation.
I would have a triple question. How many days takes the training of a driver? B, can Europeans apply? And C, if there's such a big need, why do you aim only, or not 100% employment? Only 600 on 8.
Thank you. Very short, concrete questions. There was some.
Very quickly, Chinese investors, have you had any success to engage them, and are they interested in participating in such discussions?
Also had a question regarding the events that happened in the events of Congo and in the Lake Edward. How do you see because everything is arced on the oil industry and the success of the oil industry in Uganda, and I've been personally for a long time to Uganda as well recently, and how do you see the investments and the industry moving on in the future, because that's where the investments are going to come from. And what if government policy changes on if drilling will be allowed eventually? What if these things change?
Thank you. I think that might be a question that we can discuss in the panel discussion as well. But you might maybe want to reply quickly on the first questions.
Yeah, that is a lot of questions. I hope I noted your question well. First, how long is the training? It's about a month for a new trainer, for a new driver. For refreshers, it can be a couple of days, depending on the needs of the company that sends their drivers. You also asked another question, and then the success rate was also a question, I think. No. No, it's actually strictly national content that we want to support. So no, in that sense. Why not 100% success rate? Well, it's somehow a conservative planning from our side. We know that even if you have a very attractive training that guarantees you a job, of course, there might be dropouts. The training is not for free. It's actually in the local context, it's quite expensive, or it's seen as being quite expensive, because before training as a driver was somehow very cheap because there was almost no training. So it's an investment that has come into the market for the drivers, which is new, and they have to accept it first. And I think that price tag will be a challenge for us in the beginning. So until we have the first success stories where people actually get jobs and have a very high salary, then people will start actually appreciating more and are willing to pay it over the course of that training. The Chinese investors, yes, I mean we are in touch in Uganda with CNOOC, which is a Chinese oil production and exploration firm, and they are very, I mean in Uganda they are really part of these joint venture partners, which consist of Tullow, Total, and CNOOC, and they are as interested in collaborating with us as the others. But it's, I guess, somehow coincidence, and somehow also the reason, because Total is the biggest player in the field, that we chose to have an MOU with them, but it could have also been with CNOOC. I don't think there is any real reason to disregard them. And on Congo, the industry question, it's a long question. It's really difficult to answer. I mean, we had a lot of delays in Uganda as well, and there is, of course, a lot of issues around environmental, social disturbances. I mean, you can have a whole session on that topic. I don't know if we can go into depth there.
Maybe we can discuss that later on,
Yeah.
but I invite you to come directly over here because you saw that I already changed the setting a bit. We're going to move on to our panel discussion. So Sonia, I will invite you to come over as well, and Alexandre from Expertise France. And I am delighted that we also have a representative from the European Commission, Decimus Bergos, who is the head of private sector and investment climate at DG DEFCO. Decimus, thanks for being here. So please join us here at the table. I actually leave you the space. And I will directly address the first question to you, Decimus. First of all, thanks for coming again. And now that we heard two direct, very concrete project examples, we would like to learn more about the viewpoint of the European Commission, actually. So what's the view of the European Commission on the role of the private sector? It's on.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I do not possess universal knowledge in all these challenging issues, but I think I will be sufficiently equipped to enlighten you on what we're doing right now. Two quick remarks. Libya. It's a very interesting case because Libya was a country which, in theoretical terms, had achieved social and financial inclusion, something that we are striving in many areas around the world. However, the model was static. The institutions did not evolve, and it was under the assumption that the rigs would be pumping oil forever. And therefore, at a certain moment, it was about to crash. Now, what Expertise France is doing in Libya is very interesting because the role of private sector in fragile states is one of the areas where most of our resources will be concentrated, because we see the highest dividends coming from out there. Now, it's interesting, the description, the lack of, okay, you want me to go out from this? Okay, so I'm not going to tell you about the time that I was in Kenya working on the Northern Corridor. So what are we doing for the private sector? Okay, a quick, let's say, how can I say, walk down the memory lane. Private sector has always been part of the policy frameworks of the European Development Fund, on our development cooperation frameworks, the consensus. So it's nothing new. However, framework conditions of how it's delivered have changed because in the previous, let's say, policy on private sector, which was always private sector development, and this is where we have a change. Back in 2003, what was said there was that you, European institutions, do what you do best, work on building policy and regulatory environments, and leave the finance of the private sector, the investment part, the financial institutions. And although that was a good division of labor, per se, it didn't work very well because it was, at the end, a situation where, with good intentions, the idea is build it and they will come. So go help the countries to build the policy environment, the regulatory frameworks, institutional capacity building, inject some capital, and then things will come into place. And the Agenda 2030, and this was the MDG era, Agenda for Change later, the Agenda 2030 comes in and says, well, guys, you got it wrong. We need resources, massive resources. Private sector is there, and we should start discussing with them how it will work as developmental actor. The problem with that is that it meant we need a new economy, an economy with new rules, with new perceptions, which we do not have right now. Now, in 2014, the Commission, having recognized the changing context, we came out with a new communication on private sector, on how to work with the private sector. And this time, the fundamental difference is it was not stopping in development, it was going to engagement, which sounds, let's say, simplistic, but is a fundamental change in the way we work. And there we defined a number of actions where we are active right now, starting from promoting business advisory services to going to areas of financing, infrastructure, agriculture, SMEs, working on corporate social responsibility as core business model, green industrialization, you name it. And as in the institution, the policy, if you want, influence of Agenda 2030 was even bearing more substantial, and seeing also the circumstances around us, and also because of, if you want, the shock to the system that the migration gave, it was obvious that more needed to be done. And this is where was the genesis of the external investment plan that you all have heard about, which is about to be announced because we have stopped the things now, the regulatory process, and everything is approved the 28th of September, and to be presented also mainly in the framework of the EU-African Business Forum in Abidjan this last November. And what does this mean right now? And I think the external investment plan exemplifies a lot the way we're working now with the private sector. With this three-pillar story, philosophy that the external investment plan has, access to finance, technical assistance, structured dialogue, we try to bring into our work this alignment of incentives between the private sector and the externalities in the market failure that we're trying to address out there. Some people call it market failure, other people they call it governance failure. And this means now that in every level, from local to country to regional to European, we systematically engage with the private sector, bringing also sufficient risk capital to exemplify, because we cannot cover the needs. Let's not be, the needs out there are enormous. What we can do is convince the system, the financial services, the private sector, that the perception of risk in Agenda 2030 needs to change, and there is opportunity out there, scaling opportunities, impact opportunities, investment opportunities that can be sustainable, and there is reason to capture, dividends that come from demographic growth, from an emerging consumer class that is now we're experiencing in Africa, in a way that if it is left unattended, and if it is not become, especially Africa, a shared economic space with Europe, we are going to have a massive failure of which we are going to pay later. No? So I'm sorry, I prefer maybe to stop here because and maybe people have questions to,
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Decimus. I just have a very short follow-up question on that. So if we think of all these new investments going to Africa, where do you actually see the role of European implementing agencies like Expertise France and GIZ and all that?
It is clear that, okay, I don't know if you're familiar, we have, for example, the Extended Plan has 5 investment windows in various sectors: agriculture, energy, transport, SMEs, smart cities, digitalization. In each one of these areas, I'm saying it become easier, you need to develop an ecosystem. Why things are not working in Africa? Not because there are no opportunities, not because it's because, first of all, the ecosystem for business support is not out there. The social inclusion is still incomplete. The financial inclusion has not been jump-started. It is apparent that with the existing setup, what we have seen historically, all these processes were driven by public-private dialogue, by social contracts in economies that they found ways through from the education sector to the master planning of the economy, to the labor market management system, to the industrialization, to value chains, trade integration, to build economies. These things are not happening out there and cannot happen in the foreseeable future without massive presence of these actors that can support the emergence of such ecosystem. So therefore, it goes without saying that the presence of institutions like yours are absolutely necessary because, I mean, the driver's training in Uganda, it's a typical example. Vocational training, countries like France and Germany with enormous tradition in vocational training, where you need to certify, accredit, build national qualification schemes, regional qualification schemes. This kind of, if you want technology transfer in a developmental envelope, is the way to go. It just did not happen so intensively in the past, but it's going to happen now. And this time it's going to be more aligned with an investment portfolio, which is it's much more meaningful when you sit down and you discuss with the private sector. Because the private sector in the beginning would say, what is there? If all this engagement, before we reach the point of understanding that this is the way that the new economy should be built for the good of all of us. Thanks.
Thank you. So I would like to turn to you, Sonia. Decimus talked a lot about the private sector. The private sector is often looking for quick wins, but GIZ wants to promote sustainable development. So how do you work with this challenge, actually? How do you make sure that private investors comply with standards?
Yeah, it's actually quite a good question, and we are being asked this a lot. And first of all, I must say that I don't really agree that all companies are always looking for a quick win. I mean, if we just go back to the example of Total, Total has been in Uganda for quite a few years, and they haven't even, taken out a drop of oil yet. They haven't, they haven't even made any profit in Uganda yet, but still they're there and they're investing, and they're going to be there for another 30 to 40 or to 50 years. So it is really in their own interest to be investing and to have a social impact there as well, because they need to be accepted from the local population, from the local government, and so forth. So it's not a quick win, but they also need to understand what are sustainable kind of goals. How can we make sure that this is according to our rules and regulations when we are spending public money. And I think this is mainly the negotiation and discussion we have, and what takes some time up until we understand their language, they understand our language. But of course, we must make sure that it is according to social and environmental standards. So everyone must sign compliance contracts and so forth to really make sure that this is happening. We also work with other companies and, human rights, against child work and so forth. All these rights are, of course, inscribed in the work in the corporations we do.
Thank you. And you, Alexandra, talk more about entrepreneurship as well, and the route to entrepreneurship you mentioned. What does that route look like, and what are the main stumbling blocks on the way, especially in a fragile context like we have it in Libya?
Okay. First and foremost, I duly noted your phrase regarding our intervention in those countries in the coming years. I keep in mind, and I will get back into you. No, just before addressing your question, just a small remark. We are talking about quick wins for private sector, and I do agree with you. We are focusing on large investment. That's your program. But when you come to local private sector operators, they are more interesting in making things moving forward than the public sector. My experience after 10 years developing private sector development program in the MENA region in Africa, local organizations, local private companies are requesting direct support. Our mandate as Expertise France, GIZ, the European Commission, is to build the states in which we are intervening with their agreement, of course. And we are not enough addressing directly the needs of SMEs for a simple reason: ownership, sustainability. But in a fragile country like in Libya, if you do not support the SMEs and the entrepreneurs directly now, then nothing's going to happen. And you could pour millions over public institutions, building a very nice legal environment, a very conducive framework for intervention. Nothing's going to happen because it's too slow. So the private sector development programs we are trying to develop are twofold and should have two dimensions: building the state and the overall environment, including the investment side, but also bringing technical and direct support to entrepreneurs. I mean technically, not financially, but technically, helping an entrepreneur, and that's the link with your question, helping an entrepreneur directly to create his own company in a country like in Libya. I like to give you an example. You have young people coming to my office say, "Oh, I'm a student in engineering. I would like to launch my company in solar energy." "Oh, yes, very good. Very happy to meet you. What's your plan?" "I would like to start my company in solar energy." "Okay. What do you want to do? You want to produce, you want to sell, you want to buy, you want to import from China, you want to create something?" "I want to buy, I want to open a company on solar energy." Okay, so the entrepreneurship route in a fragile country, and especially in Libya, is a long way. And we need to help those entrepreneurs, and those, especially those aspiring entrepreneurs, to become business ready. And that starts from the basic, like how is a business plan? What is a business plan? How to do it? How to present your business in 3 minutes? We train 100 people to present their business idea in 3 minutes. We selected 10, and out of those 10, I only understood two ideas. Well, they received 2 weeks of training. So the entrepreneurship is a long process. We should mainstream within the university curricula, but also as of the beginning, as of the youngest age, what is it to become an entrepreneur? And also provide them with direct, tailor-made training, local, contextualized. That's the key to the success.
Thank you, Alexandre. We're going to take your questions right after. I just have one last question, I think, and then I'm going to open up to your questions. So my last question is going to go to Nathan, and I wonder how do you actually make sure that your achievements are sustained once you leave a country? How do you make sure that structures you established are maintained when you're away?
Thank you for that question. Of course, in development cooperation, this should be a topic that we discuss very early on in implementation, or even before that. So I think the best projects are the ones that you already know in the beginning how you want to end them. And in this case, for the Uganda case, driver training, we actually have this business case I talked about earlier. So there is, in the proposal that how we started the whole project off, there is already an exit strategy involved. So we know already that how the school that we launched will develop over time and how it will become self-sustaining. Of course, not every project has this clear business case. And sometimes you don't have a business case at all. So sometimes you have to find a way to find, during implementation, exit strategy. And I think what is important there is if you work with the private sector, you have to find the incentives and the interests. I mean, that comes back to what we said earlier about the core business interests, or even not the core business interests, but interests overall, like who has which interest. And if you find someone that has a strong interest in the project and you believe that there is also a financing capability of that partner, then that is an avenue where you should go. Of course, again, not in every project that is so easy, but I think looking for incentives and interest of local partners is the key.
Okay, thank you. And I think someone else already found interest in the statement before, so I will open up or give you the microphone now for the first question, and we can take several questions, I think, at once, and then make sense.
Thank you. I have a question for Alexander. I can imagine that a country like Libya, where you have on one hand a lot of people who have left the country and who have had to develop their entrepreneurial skills, the diaspora could play a very important role of inspiring, of giving examples, of leading. How do you integrate the diaspora in your program?
Thank you. And there was another.
Thanks a lot. I have actually two questions. First to the colleague from DEFCO. If I am an entrepreneur, I have a private company, and I would like to benefit from the external investment plan, like you mentioned in Pillar 1. What exactly do I need to do to benefit from it? Because I cannot really see the role of organizations like GIZ in that, but rather of large financing institutions. How would I be able to do this? What would I need to do? My first question. Second one is, I can see that for development of the private sector in most of the African countries, we need probably both working with the government on one side and on the other side directly work with the private sector in entrepreneurship, etc. Now you could both take as an entrance point. You could say I work first of the regulatory environment, or I work first with the companies. Probably both has to go in parallel, but if you had to make a choice, what is your preference? What would you say from your experience is the better entrance point? Thanks.
Maybe it would be nice to introduce yourself before you ask your question.
Hello, my name is Peter Kugler. I'm from Conservation International, but I'm talking about the quick wins, and I think there was a criticism about quick wins, and I think this is a bit unfair to multilateral corporations. I was once with one of these companies investing in Uganda. It was Nile Breweries, owned at that time with Sub Miller. Quick wins are extremely expensive when you have internal payback periods of 3 years. So whatever you do, you need to have your investment case ready for the board. If I'm saying I want to have local supply of agricultural brewing raw materials, I need to make sure that this is really competitive. Otherwise, I import it from Australia or South Africa. If you say there is a potential for, let's say, growing malting barley in the Mount Elgon region, or maize or sorghum, then make sure that this comes really to the brewing gate. I mean, there is an interest, but they don't have too much time to waste expensive time on these things, and so that's quite important. And the last thing I would say is, if you have a problem, for example, on transport, and you don't have the truck drivers, you fly in the spare parts, as it was done, for example, in the breweries in South Sudan.
Thank you. So I think all questions were directed to all of you. Who wants to start?
The question was, private sector enterprise comes to see opportunities from the first pillar of the AIP, why TA provided by international agency would be required. Now, we have to see the circumstances of this postulation. Are we talking about an emerging local SME that is going to a local bank that has received a credit line from a lead financial institution, from one of the development finance institutions? Are we talking about something that we're trying to do in a fragile state? Are we trying to do something? So it depends. What I'm trying to say is on where you position yourself. For the most sensitive aspect, which is micro and small and medium enterprises, the lack of ecosystem, support ecosystem, in order to allow them to grow, and the lack of professional services, because in some countries, very few countries, there are still small ecosystem incubators, accelerators, small venture capital that can support you to do that. But in most of the countries, a small entrepreneur cannot find a market of support ecosystem that will allow them to present a proposal to a financial institution that gives sufficient reassurance that risk in the absence of collateral, because that's always the biggest problem of SMEs, that the risk of entrepreneurial capacity, sound business plan, a good team, a good product, a good distribution network is and others are sufficiently addressed. And this becomes truly a developmental push. So this kind of class, if you want, of enterprises will be seeking support from this kind of systems. And I give also another example that I have discussed with GIZ, something that they're doing in Yemen, a very, very difficult country, in the area of renewable energy with the local vocational training system. So this is the circumstances where the TA is coming to support structuring investment proposals for this kind of class of enterprises. And then we have also the TA that comes on the other side, on the structured dialogue, where we try to help the countries now with their policy and regulatory environment, and from where it's the more, if you want, conventional and traditional way of working. So these are the circumstances where, yeah.
My question was, what do I need to private company benefit from this?
Yes, but how do you find you as a European company, a local company?
Let's say is there any type of company who do something like participation?
Yes, there is now. We're building the mechanics, if you want, of the system. Is going to be very much similar to the European Fund for Sustainable Strategic Investment. So there will be a portal. We will have a function of front back office where also private companies can apply and express interest, which will be channeled through the lead financial institutions for assessment. And there you go, depending on which area you're positioning yourself. Are you going to invest in a value chain? Are you going to invest on some digital financial services scheme? Are you going to want to be part of some kind of infrastructure bond that receives sovereign guarantee? So it very much depends on that. But there will be a mechanism for everybody to come forward and apply for such support. Definitely, we're talking here about supporting areas where additionality give us maximum leverage. And of course, somebody will say, but in Africa, additionality is almost everywhere. Fair enough. But we know with the limited amount of money that we have at hand, we have to prioritize. So this is how it's the philosophy and how it's gonna work. So it's not as simple as any company coming. A company should come, demonstrate that they are ready to share the risk, to provide demonstration effect, to have impact, to respect a number of norms that have to do with taxes, with environment, with social norms, and we start from there.
Yeah, I would like to add to that and combine some of the questions which were going around, not on what can you do as a private investor to apply, I don't know. But you also asked about the role of TA, of technical assistance in the EIP. And what we have seen on the ground is actually that it's not enough for companies to have finances to then invest. I mean, for Total, if they don't have enough drivers, if they can't source locally, it doesn't matter to them. They will sort it out because they are on the ground in the country. They got entry points. But if you're a smaller company, these are really big hurdles for you. You want to sell something. There's no one who can actually maintain your technical appliances. There's no one who actually understands what is written on them as well. And maybe you don't have enough money to source from China. So what do you do to really make sure that the agricultural produce, for example, for SA Miller, is really coming from the country? You can't be working with the farmer institutions and farmer organizations. So there's really a lack there on companies wanting to invest in Africa and then going into these hurdles and then deciding, no, that's too risky. No infrastructure, no people who can work for me, no information. So I think this is really the lack. This is really the gap where then the TA comes in and really makes the investment work on the ground. And I think this is then also combining on what you were asking as well on the local supplier development. On working in agricultural products, it's very much the same. If you're a brewery, you want to source locally, you must actually work with the farmer organizations, but that's not your core business. What are you going to do? It's actually cheaper to buy it from China, but hey, maybe they've got a sustainable kind of department in there and they want to make a business case. So you also asked where would be our entry point if we had to choose. Well, in our program, we chose the business entry point, and we are deriving suggestions and recommendations for the structural level as well, to work at the policy level as well on what needs to be changed. And we actually find that this is bringing quite a lot of impact, but of course it must go hand in hand.
Just on the diaspora, and when I came in the program, I thought fantastic. Over 6 million people. We have 1.5 million abroad living, and they have money and they're traveling. But actually, it's 14. And they are actually traveling a lot back and forth to Libya, which is one of the key reason why we can do something in Libya, is because Libyan people can still travel. So that makes our life much more easy. But so the diaspora and the Libyan diaspora is very limited, unfortunately for us. So what we do is we try to have godfathers for all the events we're doing, for the business plan contest, for the bootcamps, for all activities linked to entrepreneur. We try to have godfathers living abroad, businessmen living abroad, that can share their experience with the young Libyans, to mentor them, to show them that it's possible. That is our work. It's true that for different countries like Tunisia, Morocco, the diaspora is enormous. A lot of the EU-funded programs are addressing this issue and trying to also get the money back in the country, and with on an investment perspective rather than on a livelihood perspective. But in Libya, we don't face this kind of situation.
Yes, just to say also something to clarify, because we're discussing here always about entrepreneurship, entrepreneurs, private sector, and I'm talking about sub-Saharan Africa because that's close to my heart and I have spent many years down there. There are many important dividends, and one of them is, for example, productivity in the informal sector. Okay, it's not like Africa in 5 years from now suddenly it will be industrialized with the brilliant entrepreneurs, with the financial markets functioning, financial infrastructure, blah blah, everything digital. We go. No, we have to get, first of all, the dividends of social and financial inclusion that will allow, first of all, the biggest part of the population, that's in informal sector, to start coming into the economy. We have to bring women in the economic productivity equation. I mean, just tell you, we launched, it has just approved a fund, the first fund that DEVCO has on women economic empowerment, something that a year from now was appearing like a very risky thing to do, and we have received very, very, very key support by finance institutions, by corporations, by people that they see that that's a big stake. So let's not also think that is always about private sector entrepreneurship. It's about generating an economy and economic inclusion process that has been there, because not everybody is going to become an innovative entrepreneur, and there is nothing wrong with that. Okay, but everybody can be part of the financial inclusion process.
Okay, thank you for this addition. And I saw one last question over here. Is it still already replied? Okay, you have one?
Thank you. My question relates to the informal economy. How is the EIP, or the Employment for Development in Africa, the GIZ project, factored in the informal economy? Because we know in Africa the majority of women and youth are part and parcel of the informal economy, which is not regulated by the state, and they are suffering from different problems there. So how is it really this targeting the informal economy, and also social protection issues also comes in here? Thank you.
Thank you. Dorothy Stark from the German Permanent Representation. I have one question to the colleagues from GIZ and Expertise France, not on your projects, but more on your experiences from working on the ground. What we hear here is as the main motivation behind the external investment plan, especially in the creation of the new instruments, the new guarantees, that this has been the one instrument that has been missing in the portfolio, which is new money to trigger private investments. So I would pose your question to you from your experiences, in how far a financial instrument has really been missing, or in how far all these other elements on investment climate and so on are really the main concern that we should tackle. Second question would be to the colleague from the Commission. Again, the main narrative we hear here in Brussels is that once we get the investment climate right, and once we have all the instruments, then there will somehow decent jobs will create themselves. And so my main takeaway, especially from the GIZ project, is even when the investments are coming, decent jobs don't create themselves, and you need still something more. And how far this plus element will be integrated in the second and third pillar of the plan.
Thank you. So you have one last round of answers, and it's only your answers but very, very quick, because I think you're all hungry and we want to go.
Thank you very much. I'm coming from a Spanish agency for international development cooperation. We have been called by the Commission regarding to take place, or to have a place here in the European External Investment Plan, what is a great challenge for us. We have some experience working with the private sector, but this is a new situation, and we, the European financial entities, are very concerned by this external investment plan. Just thank you for the very, very interesting presentations and the work you are doing with the private sector, and what is very important is taking this private sector, for example, the European private sector, into these projects, and trying to find out these incentives and to make it. Sorry, just two questions about the political risk coverture. What happened? It's to our colleague of DEFCO about the external investment plan. What is foreseen regarding these political risks that are very important in order to the enterprises to go into these countries, and the experiences about the local currency loans. Which are the experiences you have regarding the use of local currencies for these loans? If you
Sorry, we need a workshop on that. So I propose that we have a very short round of answers, and you can also give us your takeaways, and then we're going over to lunch. So no pressure, but.
I can start. I take the question about the informal economy. We want to reach out to 100,000 people for income. We want to reach out to 40,000 people for jobs. Of course, the informal sector plays a big role in that. If you were just to target the formal jobs, from office to driving, maybe if we just said jobs with a formal contract, of course, we would never get there. So a big part of our project in all of the 7 countries we active in is the informal economy. And not to make it too long, it's interesting where the informal economy meets the formal economy, I think, especially in the agricultural area. And I think we have a lot of projects where we work with farm-based organizations and with large buyers. And when we support both to go into a structured dialogue, to take that word, and to support that as a project, then it actually works. And it doesn't mean that the farmers in the end are formalized. They don't necessarily pay taxes in the end, but they have a good buyer, and they have a good structured relationship with their buyer, and they become more sustainable in their business, and they get a better income, and in the end they create jobs. So this is just a short answer. That's an example. But of course we have several other projects in other sectors that target the informal economy.
Yes, and of course, then there's always the question, how do you count them then for impact, and monitoring values? And of course, everything is behind what Nathan was saying as well. we have got criteria from when do we actually count a job as a job. It must be a decent job. They can't be working in precarious situations. They must be able to sustain their family with that, and so forth, even if they're in the informal sector. I will try to tackle your question. Is the EIP the missing piece of puzzle? I think is really, you know, in the whole concert of different instruments around. So I'm not sure on whether I can answer it from that side, but you asked from our experience on the ground, and I can tell you that major investments in Africa is one of the lacking pieces of the puzzle for sure. I mean, I can tell you maybe just an example. We're working in the northern part of Mozambique. There is large gas fields being found. It's actually the same gas field in front of Tanzania as well, where we're working. And a few years ago, 2014, the final investment decision from the big companies was just there. It was just going to happen. And there was a major push in the country going to say this is going to have major impact in all employment and job creation. And, you know, the whole country was gearing up. But the final investment decision didn't come through. There is no investment in the northern part of Mozambique. You know, there's all these small, medium-sized enterprises which were going to set up, waiting for the big push, and then no demand on the labor market was there. There was no investment coming in. So, you know, this is really, there's just nothing out there anymore. We actually had to close our offices, maybe waiting that in a few years' time something is going to happen there. But, you know, there's no refineries that weren't built, no transport and so forth. And I think this is one of the missing puzzle pieces. Whether how the instrument works, I'm not sure. Alexandra.
I do agree. Two things. One, being very controversial, is, as I'm here to talk about my experience in Libya, conflict affected, trying to formalize business in this context is make no sense because the state is just failing. It makes no sense. I would also be very controversial in saying that trying to formalize and putting money, a lot of money into formalizing businesses in sub-Saharan Africa sometimes makes also no sense because what they need is skills. And they will get the sense themselves to the importance of getting registered. But at the very same time, if we don't give the tools to the state to offer services and to the SMEs when they're registered, then it will not work. So being registered to be registered makes no sense. So that's why I'm not a really big fan of, you know, registration businesses program. On the large investment, here again on Libya. When the economy will restart, it's going to happen. Those large companies, they still have no access to funding in Libya. The financial system is collapsing. So nobody will lend them the 3 million that they need to start their cement factory. But the country needs to rebuild. So if there is no instrument whatsoever, the World Bank will not lend the money. So if there is no instrument whatsoever to lend the money to these large companies, which will be creating a lot of jobs and rebuild the country, then nothing's going to happen and it will take so much time. So I do believe, personally speaking, in this specific case, that it's very much needed.
Mozambique. We were discussing so many years about the Nacala corridor. When I was 95, 98, I was in Malawi. It never happened if Nacala corridor had taken place. We had a different economy, not in Mozambique. Informality. Yes, it's not easy, but you have to go and look for it. Informality is in value chains, is in micro enterprises, in marketplaces, in small manufacturing like the garment that we see evolving in Africa. You have to go and find it. And the best way to go and find out the informality is, first of all, to communicate with the informal sector out there, because the informal sector like to stay away from the formal sector. When you see a government agent or somebody going close to them, they disappear. So I can give you the example of when I was in Malawi. I was going to the Ministry of Agriculture Communication Service, and we were producing radio messages about extension, about weather, about markets, and putting popular music and passing messages. So when we were going out to find the informal sector, they were waiting for us because they knew we had communicated with them. If we had gone there with a government car or with a European Commission car, they would have said irrelevant. Now, digital gives us a big hope on accessing informality. We have seen it happening in many countries, and we think that is an empowerment tool that we cannot leave unattended. And that's the big hope, because this is a tool that will give us a very, very important building block for financial inclusion. And what is happening right now, I'll give you an example. At a certain time, I was in Myanmar with a social enterprise that was working through the mobile pay, as you talk, accounts of the people in the slums there. They were building credit profiles, working with microfinance institutions, giving microloans for 1 week, for 2 weeks, $10, $20 to people that they would have never had imagined that would be trusted by financial institutions. So communicate, digital, go out there, find them where they are and work with them. And this is where also agencies like these ones here are very important. Thanks.
Thank you, Zizima. So I think what we learned today is that capacity development does play a huge role when it comes to making sure that large-scale investments are done in a sustainable way and that they actually trickle down and are at the benefit of people, and that we really have an enabling environment to attract more investments. So thank you to our panel, thank you all for coming, and we have the time to discuss more over lunch. All our panelists are going to be here for lunch, so if you have more questions, don't hesitate to ask them. So thank you all for coming to our Capacity for Change event, and enjoy your lunch.